So relief on the LPG front but burden on the diesel front. Will this balancing act by the UPA work? That's our big debate this evening. Joining us, Arun Maira, member of the Planning Commission, who joins us tonight from Delhi. Also joining us is Gurcharan Das, the author of India Grows at Night. Prasenjit Bose, left-wing economist, is with us this evening. We'll also be joined by Piyush Goyal, the Rajya Sabha MP of the BJP, as well as the party's national treasurer from Mumbai shortly. Mr. Maira, would you say that this has been a balancing act today, that it's not been easy for the government to walk this tightrope, but that it is a risk that is being taken?
It is a necessary step. These are necessary steps in the interests of a sustainable growth of the economy and for providing on a continuing basis through taxes what people need for their social benefits. So it is a difficult path because people have to understand the need for these actions, and I think this is what we are seeing playing out, that people do feel the burden. Obviously, if you increase the price of something, it's going to come out of people's pockets and they feel the pinch of it. But to understand that this is a necessary step for the better good of themselves in the future is a political process which we are going through right now.
What about the hike in the LPG cap? Do you think that, are you disappointed with that decision? Do you think that that may be a politically smart decision but perhaps not an economically smart one, although it has been highly unpopular among the middle class?
You know, Nidhi, as you said, economically smart and politically smart. If you have to go through a process of the people coming together, accepting certain things, and they will of course feel the pinch of certain things, but accepting those things, it is a political process. So if we do something which is taking people along, that is politically very smart and ultimately very smart for the economy also. So just to make it naked, to impose, bold, naked economics on people is not a smart thing to do, and it backfires generally. So I think if the government has worked out that we have to concede here but take there, and that this would be in balance the best in terms of spreading the impact on people, it would be a smart thing to do.
Prasenjit Bose, let me take then your reaction to all of this. Don't you think it's better at the end of the day, because a fuel hike in a sense would be inevitable? Many were saying a diesel price hike was long overdue, it was inevitable. But is it better for people to take that burden, 50 paise, 1 rupee per litre a month at a time, rather than suddenly 5 rupees or so, the way that it was done in September, which suddenly came down like a ton of bricks? Is this a better way to do it?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there are two issues you are raising. First of all, I don't even agree with the fact that this diesel price hike is inevitable, because we are not looking at the overall inflationary scenario. You already have over 7% inflation, which has been high and much higher for quite some time now, over 2-3 years. And on the top of it, if you are deregulating diesel prices, which is an agricultural input, which goes into your public transportation, you have something called the cascading impact. You hike the price of diesel, many other prices go up, and therefore inflationary expectations in the economy, they remain very high, and therefore inflation doesn't come down. So I think the government, by increasing diesel prices, is in any way contributing to inflation. That is point number one. Point number two, this mix of populism and hard economics that you are talking about, I think that this is basically trying to be clever by half. You are giving, from the left hand, you are giving the LPG cap increase, which is a very minor kind of relief. On the other hand, on the right hand, with the right hand, you are taking it away by giving an open, license for the oil companies to periodically revise the diesel prices. I think this is not only not an unsmart move, I think it is a move against the interests of the people. This will only fuel inflation.
Okay, so you feel it's a completely bad move, Mr. Gurcharan Das? Isn't that logical, what Prasenjit Bose says? Because that's always been the worry about diesel.
Well, you always have to balance the inflationary pressures in an economy with growth. And ultimately, what creates jobs, what gives people benefits is growth. 1% rise in economic growth results in 1.5 million jobs, 15 lakh jobs, direct jobs, and 4.5 million indirect jobs, which support 5 people per family. So the reality is that this is the best thing the government could do. When you start, the worst way to give subsidies to help the poor is by tampering with prices. We learnt this, the Soviet Union collapsed because they were tampering with prices. And therefore it's much better to give cash transfers, for example, than tamper with prices. Or what you do is you make people buy diesel cars, you help ultimately the middle class with these things. There are so many distortions you create in your production mechanism that ultimately the whole economy loses out. So I think this is a good news, and frankly let's remember that this is going back to the regime we had. We had decontrolled diesel before the UPA government came.
Yes.
And so you're going back to a sane
Although this
and
is not
rational.
even, although I have to interrupt you because this is not complete decontrolling either.
Yeah.
And there are concerns that the government will still be really calling the shots, and it is a political call at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's why you can't really trust this government. You can't trust them.
I mean, that is a worry that you have.
Yeah, of course one has to worry. One just hopes that this is the rational what is prevailing today and which is going to actually save this country is this gradual shift back to reform and bring back growth. And unless you have growth, you can forget it.
Piyush Goyal,
Can I?
Yeah, okay, Prasenjit, quick rebuttal there, yes.
Yeah, I think that Mr. Das is drawing a very tenuous linkage between economic growth and inflation. I fail to understand how cutting subsidies contribute to growth. You are today having a situation where your growth rate in any case is falling down. It has come down, industrial growth is stagnating, and all that is happening despite what you call reforms which are continuing. So the fact is that you have to look at far more fundamental reasons why there is a global economic crisis. You are having a economic slowdown across the world.
The quick answer.
Yeah, please listen to me, Mr. Das.
Okay, complete your point and then I'll let him...
The short point being, the other point that you are making, that SUVs, what is the proportion? Not more than 10% of diesel consumption in our country goes for luxury diesel cars. What about the 90% of people who are using diesel? You're talking about small farmers, you're talking about ordinary working people who use public transport. So this whole logic of subsidizing the middle class through diesel subsidy is a complete bunkum. It is not at all based on facts.
Okay, Mr. Das.
The fact is you are contributing to inflation.
Okay, before I come to Piyush Goyal,
and
Mr. Das wants to
push inflation and the government is contributing to inflation.
Mr. Das.
This doesn't even deserve a reply. This is typical communist rhetoric that the government should just give away everything to the people and growth does not matter. The fact is that if you get rid of diesel subsidy, you'll get 100,000 crores which you can invest in infrastructure, which will create real jobs in the economy and push and create and have a self-sustaining thing. Frankly, it's a choice between teaching people to fish versus giving them fish.
Okay, let me take this question to Piyush Goyal then, because Piyush Goyal, it is the NDA government that actually deregulated diesel first. Why does the BJP today have a problem with this? And you're an economist yourself, I'm sure you understand the economic logic of this.
Not at all a problem with me, Nidhi. In fact, what Mr. Gurcharan Das said is, in a manner of speaking, music to my ears. Because all my complaints about this government in the last 2 or 3 years have been largely centered around everything Mr. Das said. I have been pleading with this government, teach the people how to fish, don't just provide them a temporary fish for a meal or two. I have been pleading with this government, set the economy right, let's set growth right, let's get the country moving forward. This government has failed to work. What Mr. Gurcharan Das misses is that we have to look at this whole story a little more holistically. He is very right, it was the NDA which deregulated this price structure. We allowed the oil marketing companies to reset prices on a fortnightly basis starting April 2002, and that worked wonderfully well. It was not as if every week prices went up or every fortnight. Prices went up occasionally, prices went down occasionally. They moved with the times. If at all there was a burden, it was a very nominal small burden, and that was an era when inflation was down to 3 or 4%. So within a 3 or 4% inflation scenario, which the other colleague on the panel mentioned, it's something one can still bear with a little bit of small increases occasionally. This government came into power in 2004 and completely politicized the oil pricing scenario. For the last 7-8 years, whether it was under compulsion of coalition politics, whether it was their own inability to bite the bullet, whether it was their own compulsions of election management, where they thought if there were price increases it would affect them electorally, for 7-8 years, they completely ruined the oil companies' fiscal situation and came to a pass where there was 150,000 crores of subsidies. Now, I blame this squarely on the UPA's mismanagement, and Mr. Gurcharan Das is right. We had set the wheel right, they reversed that, and now it has taken them 9 years to bring back and reinvent and learn the story again.
But
I
you
feel very
concede that they had no
disappointed.
choice? Do you concede that they had no
Why
choice?
was there no choice?
Whatever mistakes were made in the last 8-9 years.
How can you now say that now it's a liberalization, Nidhi? They have ruined the situation. They have brought the country to this pass. Now we have a situation, as Mr. Prasenjit said, where there's a 9%, 10%, 11% CPI inflation. The last figure is higher than the previous month. Now, when the common man is already reeling with such a high burden, at that stage to deregulate and tell the oil companies now you gradually push the burden on the common man, that is certainly objectionable. Nidhi, they should have done it gradually. They should have done it over a period of time. Probably growth would not have suffered to this situation, as Mr. Gurcharan Das rightly pointed out, if they had managed this situation correctly. So for their mismanagement, for their sin, I don't think there's any great virtue in now deregulating and saying the oil companies will do it.
I will
And
take that, I will take that back to Mr. Myra. Mr. Myra, you know, is this, as Piyush Goyal is saying, a step that has just come way too late, that this should have happened over the years? It didn't happen. The government allowed the situation to come to this point. But I guess you would make the point that, you know, we have to correct things now, going ahead.
Absolutely, Nidhi. Whatever has happened, okay? We have to confront reality now and say what would be the right thing to do now. And in saying what's the right thing to do now, we've got to take into account the effect our actions will have on the lives of people, as also on the future growth of the economy. So, but what's the right thing to do now? And it's been very well said that right now we are in a difficult situation. The inflation is high. At the same time, energy prices all over the world are not that benign for us, and we are having to pay a lot for energy along with our growth. So how do we adjust this situation? So it is turning out to be a politically difficult thing to do, but a necessary thing to do. And therefore, small steps, giving a little here, taking a little there, would have to be done because the inflation is so high right now. If it was like in the earlier days that are being mentioned, it was perhaps easier to just allow the prices to be adjusted along with the market prices of energy. But now it is not that easy, but it has to be done nevertheless. So the political process is a difficult process, and I think all of us have to engage together, that there are many interests to be reconciled, which is what makes politics necessary. And we've got to conduct that politics, I think, in a considerate way towards all the interests that must be reconciled to do the right thing for everybody and for the future of everybody here.
But having said that, Mr. Myra, the question that I was discussing with Mr. Gurcharan Das as well is that those who have welcomed this step will also question whether, you know, this is really deregulation and whether the government will still be calling the shots as far as diesel prices are concerned. If you really want to go the whole hog on this, let the oil companies decide.
Look, that's what I earlier said when I said you can't just throw cold, bored economics onto a situation which has got people involved, their interests involved, pain on them involved. So as you say, the government should get completely out of the way and let the oil companies do what they need to do to improve the condition for their shareholders. We can't allow just that. We have to manage this situation to reconcile the interests of various people. So government has a role to adjust the situation, to give freedom here, to take something there right now, so that various interests are being reconciled as we get the whole to grow together.
I just want
Maybe
to take that back to
this is so unfair. There is no liberalization. Then it's back to politics.
But it is about politics and economics, isn't it?
If it is about politics, then don't say that, okay, let the past be past, let 9 years be forgotten, now we have to set things right. Make up your mind if you still want to play politics with petrol prices or you want to really set things right. I think the government hasn't been able to make up its mind.
But on the issue...
I want to come in there, please.
Yes, Mr. Myra, go ahead.
I want to come in there. Please,
Yes.
let me, Nidhi.
Yes.
This word politics, one is about politicians, about who is going to get the credit, and the blame game amongst politicians and their desire to get elected. That is politics too. But the bigger politics in any society is the discourse between conflicting interests and the powers and the reconciliation. I'm saying that is always necessary in a society, no matter what the structure of the society. So we have to be into politics. I'm not saying about politicians taking credit or blame, not that. And that is what is distorting the discourse in this country. I think the politicians need to be enabling the country to have a good discourse, a good political discourse about the future that the people of the country want, and in that reconciling the interests of various sections of the society.
Okay, I want to take this back to Prasenjit.
Nidhi, can I make a point here?
But Prasenjit, on this issue of the LPG cap as well, wouldn't you concede that that is a relief? I mean, it's not the 12 cylinders that many were talking about, but from 6 to 9 is a significant relief.
Yeah, but you know, that is precisely the point I am trying to make, that the government is trying to do all this. First, I think that this cap is a completely bad idea in the first, it was a bad idea in the first place, now it is 6 to 9, it is not 12. I heard that one of the allies of the government is now demanding 24 cylinders per family. I think basically creating a dual price structure itself is irrational. And you know, it will only promote black marketing and corruption and so forth. The larger point which I am trying to make is, that you see, this whole thing about politics versus economics, I don't agree with. I insist on the fact that, you see, look at Mr. Das's argument, as if that there is a set pool of money that is involved, and therefore the only way you can spend on other things, infrastructure, health and education, is to cut back on your subsidies. My point is, why is the government failing to raise more resources? Why can't the government, raise more resources through taxation? Why can't the government do away with corporate tax concessions? When there are subsidies for the rich, there is no problem. But when there are subsidies for the poor on fuel, then people have a problem and talk about communist regimes distorting prices and so on. What about the price distortions about the, when they are given to the corporates?
We're going to talk about the tax issue as well. I'll give the last word to Mr. Das on this before I move on to that issue, on the issue of taxes. Yes.
You know, the reforms are difficult to do because they concern the long term, whereas the giveaways, the populism, takes place in the short term. So it's always difficult to persuade people that it is better to have to, instead of giving you a free television set or a free laptop or a free power, that's much easier to sell than the fact that I will build roads, I will build schools, I will build hospitals. These are things which people will see over time. And so actually this is all about the short and the long term. And the whole notion of teaching people to fish is precisely to give them capabilities. A road gives people capabilities.
And you're saying we have to start somewhere.
We have to start somewhere.
And what about Manrega? Nidhi, what about Manrega?
Piyush, I just want to go across to my colleague Shweta, who's bringing us up to date on what exactly this hike will entail in the immediate term. Shweta, we understand that we could see actually this diesel price hike coming into effect as early as tomorrow.
That's right. It is a very smart move on part of the government as well as the oil marketing companies to say that this time around they're going to actually stagger the diesel price increases instead of going in for one fat steep hike like the one we had seen in September, which was nearly to the tune of 5 rupees. So what we're seeing now is a decision by the government to allow oil marketing companies to go in for smaller increases so that the burden on the Aam Aadmi is not as much because of the kind of impact we see because of inflation. Because diesel, remember, is a politically sensitive commodity. It has in turn an impact on inflation, food inflation, transportation. So what will happen here on is a 50 paise increase per litre every month. But it will also send out the right message that yes, the government is acting on cutting subsidies, taking some of these politically tough decisions, because remember, Nidhi, the political window that the government has is a very narrow one, and it has to move forward given the fiscal strain to take some of these decisions, at least in terms of cutting the subsidy bill. So some relief today coming on the LPG front, some bit of populism as we were discussing right now, and some bit of reform. Back to you.
All right, Shweta, thanks very much for that. And in fact, in the middle of all of this, ahead of next month's budget, there's also a fierce debate that is underway now here in India about whether the country's super rich should pay more taxes. The debate began after the Prime Minister's economic advisor, Mr. C. Rangarajan, recently said that the budget could look at imposing a surcharge on income that's above a certain threshold. But India Inc. has complained strongly to the Finance Minister, saying that this is a bad move, it'll hamper growth.
Our recommendations from FICCI were that the tax structures be left unchanged.
When you raise rates of taxes, it acts against growth.
There should be no new additional taxes considered in view of the turn in sentiment, which is now cautiously optimistic.
Growth orientation will lead to much higher tax collections than merely raising rates of taxes.
We are on the verge of making a very major investment, but we are held up by an uncertain regulatory regime.
Well, our panel continues to stay with us, but first I'd just like to play out a short interview I did earlier this evening with Adi Godrej, the president of CII, who was there at that meeting with the finance minister yesterday, where India Inc. raised many concerns. Mr. Godrej, what exactly are your concerns about raising taxes on high-income individuals?
Well, our experience has always been when rates of taxes have been high, collections have been low, and vice versa. A high rate of taxes does not lead to higher collections. In fact, various factors come to play where collections might be negatively affected. So having a high rate of tax is a retrograde step.
But when you raised these concerns with Mr. Chidambaram yesterday, what did he say to you?
No, he was just there to listen to us, and of course he was accompanied by all the various secretaries in the ministry, as also the Commerce Secretary and Industry Secretary, and we were very explicit in saying that higher rates of taxes on anything, whether it is estate duty, inheritance tax or income tax, would create a very negative sentiment and perhaps go against the requirements for higher growth rates and may even lead to lower collections and not higher collections.
But do you agree with the assessment of Naina Lal Kidwai, who was with you in that meeting yesterday, that a move like this could lead to professionals relocating to more tax-friendly countries, that this could be one of the fallouts of a decision like this?
Yeah, all sorts of negative effects could take place. Some of them we may not even be able to envisage it right now. When we had high rates of taxes going up to 90% in the past, our economy was crawling and growth rate was not more than 2 or 3%. We must learn from experience. This does not work. Even if you look at all the developing countries, if you combine the corporate tax rates and the individual tax rates, we are one of the highest. So I don't think it makes sense at all to increase the marginal rates of income tax in India.
But Mr. Godrej, others would argue that if you look at the tax rates in other countries, in some of them they are much higher. In India you have that upper slab of 30%, but you don't look at France, it's talking about 75%.
But we should certainly not compare ourselves with developed countries whose targeted growth rates are 2 and 3%. Our economics are extremely different. We need higher savings rate, higher investment rates than they do. And to compare with developed countries would be totally irrelevant and would lead us to their kind of growth rates. Surely if we want France's growth rate, which is barely 1%, or the United States, which is 2%, then we should follow them. We have to grow at 8 to 9%, and we should do what other developing countries are doing, not what developed countries are doing.
One final question, Mr. Godrej. Would you then say that the idea really should be to widen the tax base, because there is a huge population in this country that doesn't pay taxes or just misrepresents how much money they make?
That's a very important point. We must expand the tax base, and one of the problems is first-time taxpayers hesitate to get into the tax net because they are worried they will be questioned about previous years. In fact, we discussed with the finance minister, and we have suggested to him that some mechanism should be devised whereby first-time taxpayers are not harassed about previous years. If that happens, we expect a very large number of people will enter the tax net, and their taxes would add to the kitty in the future.
All right, Mr. Godrej, thank you for speaking to us tonight. And so let's get straight to our debate this evening. Should the rich pay more taxes? That's what we're asking. Do tell us what you think. It is a rather interesting debate. I'll just first get Prasenjit Bose's reactions to what Mr. Godrej said. Prasenjit, you heard the list of issues that India Inc. has a problem with. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I would just respond, and I would actually like to listen to what Mr. Das has to say. That is the whole point, that in our society, when you are increasing diesel prices, then it is it is very good economics because it is populism. But when you are talking about, and Mr. Godrej said a lot of things which are factually incorrect. First of all, India's tax GDP ratio is among the lowest in the world. Among the BRICS countries, it is the lowest. Second thing is, you look at India today, we are having in the Forbes billionaires list, the third or fourth highest number of billionaires is in India, cohabiting with the biggest poor population under poverty, under malnutrition. This is the two Indias you have created. So unless and until the rich pays more, and it is not only about the marginal rate of income tax, you don't have long-term capital gains tax in our country. You have only 1% wealth tax. I mean, a country where there are above $50 billionaires, your wealth tax is 1%.
Prasenjit, answer a simple question for you, because these are government figures. I'm going to just quote to you. There are only 32 million taxpayers in this country. According to the government, those earning between 10 to 20 lakhs per year is about 1.4 million people. Those earning above 20 lakhs a year, according to the government's figures, is just 4 lakh people, which I find insane. I can't believe that only 4 lakh people make above 20 lakhs. The point is that there are lots of people out there who are not paying taxes, who are not telling the government what they really make. Isn't that the problem? Because there are lots of salaried people, salaried people whose tax gets cut at the source. Should they now also be forced to pay 45% tax?
No. I think your last question and the point you are making is well taken. In our country, the tax base is very low. You have to broaden it. And the biggest reason is in the rural areas, the rich doesn't pay taxes because agriculture is outside the tax purview. You don't discriminate between landlords and small farmers while you are taxing. So that problem is there. But when you see the topic, the question that you pose, should the super rich pay more taxes? That is what I am coming to. I am not talking about the income tax. I am talking about long-term capital gains tax, wealth tax, inheritance tax. These are taxes on the super rich. Even Barack Obama is increasing them. Across Europe, they are increasing taxes because
for once you agree with something that a US president does. For once you agree with that. I just want to take this to Gulshan Das.
If he is doing something progressive, then of course.
But Gulshan Das, how do you define who is rich and super rich? I mean, does someone who makes 10 lakhs a year qualify as being rich in India?
Well, I think the real question is investment. It's not the rich or the super rich. It's the question that our nation needs investment. The government does not have the resources to invest. In fact, the diesel price increase will slowly give some ability to invest. Investment is what creates jobs. It's ultimately what helps the poor. And so, if you drive investors out, you are hurting the country. What we can do is remove some of the exemptions, the loopholes in the taxes, expand the tax net. All these things should be done. Our tax to GDP ratio should rise. Prasenjit is right in that respect. But ultimately, we need growth in the country, which will create jobs, which will help the poor. And by soaking the rich, you're not going to solve the problem. There are very few people, and what's happening in France today is that those people are leaving France. Yeah. I have a friend, in fact, who just after the 75% rate was announced, he has left France. And so France is going to lose its investors. So similarly, let's not follow the bad examples of other countries. In India is one of the countries where the Laffer curve has worked, as Arun Maira said, that the more the lower the taxes, the higher the collections. What we need is a better tax administration.
Lower taxes on more people is
yes,
what
and no, and also better administration. A lot of people don't pay taxes because they fear harassment by the tax department. I mean, you know, every other person I know who pays full taxes, he is harassed. Now, Mr. Chidambaram should improve, and that's governance. Improve governance so that there's predictability, people are not treated arbitrarily. That is really the way to move forward.
I'll take that to Mr. Arun Maira, and I'd like to mention here that Mr. Maira is also the author of a book called Transforming Capitalism, Improving the World for Everyone. Mr. Maira, you know, this step that the Prime Minister's economic advisor talked about is generating so much debate. At the end of the day, as Mr. Gurcharan Das says, and even Prasenjit both concedes, they finally agreed on something, is that you need better administration, widen the tax net. Is this a short-term, short-sighted approach?
You know, Nidhi, while of course I completely endorse the need to improve administration and management of so many things in the country, but I want to take the bigger question. It's a question about the future of the country and the short-term sacrifices that have to be made. And I want to insert a moral argument and an argument about justice when we are here talking about the model of the growth of the economy. We've earlier said that the people, the middle class and the poorer people should understand that they have to pay more for certain things because that's a sacrifice they'll have to make today for the sake of the future growth, for the growth of this country and their future. But similarly, one could ask the rich also, is there a sacrifice that you would need to make today to enable this country to get resources to invest in its future growth? And then you say, what is the difference between the sacrifice the two are making? If people are making very large amounts of money, if they sacrifice a little more, sacrifice, I don't know whether sacrifice, but if they give up a little bit of something on the top, I mean, how much are they being hurt? Whereas the people who, like Prasenjit has been talking about, maybe they are indeed getting affected in what they could not buy now if the prices of things were to increase. So it comes to a matter of what sort of society do we want to live in.
But
it's not just a matter of how large is the economy going to be.
Mr. Maira,
what is the justice and fairness in this society?
But
of course
how
there's
do
a moral
you decide
argument.
who is rich?
We don't live just in economies.
Sure, but Mr. Maira, as a professional,
I'm going to come to
as
that.
a professional,
yes, exactly.
I'm already paying a huge chunk of tax to this government.
Yes.
Okay, and I've paid my taxes every year. I've never, held back on that. But there's a whole big, bunch of people out there who are not. They're just 4 lakh people who are admitting that they make more than 20 lakhs a year, which is absurd. Shouldn't the government be looking at that rather than going after salaried professionals who get taxed at the source anyway?
I can hear your anger, but if Prasenjit is representing some people who say that, look, you are asking me to pay more for fuel and I can barely make both ends meet, there must be anger there too. So here's what I'm talking about, that all of us are feeling hurt in different ways. Something has to be given by somebody. So there has to be a discourse amongst ourselves to say what sort of society do we want to live in, who has to sacrifice what. So let's talk here also that, look, how much people earn is a product of the sort of rules of the society, the sort of policies, tax rates, institutions that you build in society. So if one can find a person in the United States writing a book called Super Capitalism, that's Robert Reich, who teaches public policy in Berkeley in California, and was a member of the cabinet of Clinton, and he wrote this terrific book where he points as one fact. He says, look, 2 friends of his, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, have so much wealth which is equal to the 100 million poorest Americans. Now he said they both are my friends, they're very honorable people, they made all their wealth legally, innovatively, legally. But there must be something wrong in the system, he says, I'm not saying, he says, in which a system can result in this consequence, okay? So now we've got Warren Buffett himself saying, look, he feels there's something wrong in that he has to pay so little tax as compared to the woman who works in his office. So we have to have a discourse in our country about what is the type of society we are building.
Okay, so you're
What is
making
the
a very
justice and
strong
fairness in our
moral
society?
argument.
Piyush,
I'll take that to Piyush Goyal, who's been waiting patiently. Piyush, what do you think it's a moral argument at the end of the day?
Nidhi, I think all three of your panelists have made very valid points. What Prasenjit says about the poor also having his angst when he's asked to pay more diesel because, as Mr. Das says, or as Mr. Myra, they got to pay for it, reduce the fiscal deficit and keep investable surplus for investments. Similarly, the rich also have to pay for the facilities of running a business or doing a job in India. Now the issue here is, if India had a credible government, which includes all of us, I'm not excluding myself or Prasenjit or Mr. Myra from that, if we had a credible government where money was being channelized for investments, where infrastructure was being upgraded, people were living a better life, the environment was getting cleaner, I think people wouldn't mind paying the taxes or higher taxes. What hurts, what pains people, as I think Gurcharan Das ji also said, is the tax administration is so bad, most people don't want to come under the tax net and pay taxes. As Mr. Myra said, people want to participate in good things, but then the government does not give that confidence that the money you pay in taxes is going to be well utilized. So I think the bigger picture here is, keep tax rates low, incentivize more and more people to come under the tax net, don't harass them, don't have a raid raj like we are seeing in the last couple of months, encourage people to honestly pay their taxes at low levels, but then incentivize them by insisting that they invest in the country. Incentivize them by saying we'll tax you for consumption expenditure. So if there are lavish marriages, if there are expensive purchases of goods which are of, let's say, luxurious nature, you can tax that. The rich will automatically get taxed on a higher level. But I think if you start increasing tax rates to inordinately higher levels, then people will start planning their taxes by or evading their taxes,
exactly,
or alternately move to Dubai, move to Singapore.
I'll take it to Prasenjit first. Prasenjit, that's one of the big fears that's being expressed. I'll take that to Mr. Das also, that, people are just going to find ways to, stash away their money, to find ways to, and be more dishonest about it, to evade taxes.
Yeah, I mean, the point is that if the tax administration in our country is in any case very lax, that is why you have a problem of black money. You have the Mauritius route through which, a lot of Indian funds are round tripping and coming in. So my point is that, you are personally complaining about taxes. My point is that I am not saying increase taxes on professionals like you. But I have a problem living in a society where replete with hunger and malnutrition, where the richest man in our country builds a 27-story, luxury house in the middle of Bombay. I have a big problem with that. And that means somebody is not being taxed. And
okay,
they have to be taxed. That is the short point I am trying to make.
Okay, but isn't that a reasonable point that Prasenjit is making?
Well, I think
if you are Anil Ambani or Mukesh Ambani, can't you pay more tax?
Both Arun and Prasenjit are making good points, but unfortunately human beings don't behave like that. The fact is that we would like human beings to be more moral, we would like them to sacrifice for the poor, but the country needs investment, and investors have other options. Many investors in India would rather now invest abroad, and if a tax like this came, they may just move out. So it's not what we are right or wrong, that human beings are not moved by moral forces as they are by self-interest. Now, the difficulty with Prasenjit's argument is envy. Why should I care what Mukesh Ambani earns? I'm more concerned with what my neighbor earns. What do I care about the Queen of England earns? So we should not be imbued.
But if the government decides to have a certain bracket where it says, and one report said, to my horror, that everybody who earns 10 lakhs or more per year, which is a large chunk of people, will be taxed 45%. Is that fair? I mean, that's my point.
I know.
And there are salaried people, professionals who are involved in that.
Yeah, and I don't think, personally, I don't think they're talking about those people.
I'm just,
But so
these
I
are
think,
just reports.
But the real issue here is that socialism as capitalism is driven by greed and socialism is driven by envy. And what's driving Prasenjit's point is envy. That why should a man like Prasenjit, why should a man like Mukesh Ambani be earning that kind of money? I think it doesn't matter. If Mukesh Ambani contributes 7% to India's taxes and 10% to India's exports, why care what he's earning? What you're concerned with is what the people of India, how they are benefiting.
I think this is a gross misinterpretation. You see, I think Mr. Das is getting the point completely wrong. My point is not about how much Mukesh Ambani is contributing to Indian taxes. My simple question to Mr. Das is, India's corporate tax rate is 30%, plus the surcharge with surcharge and all cess, it will come to 33%. You look at the Reliance figures, whether for any 1 year, Reliance has paid taxes over 20%. That is the point. They have so many concessions, they have so many exemptions. They stash money abroad, they take use of loopholes, and through that they are undertaxed. I am saying you tax them legally.
Okay, that's
but
fine.
The law is not followed in our country.
I think we are in agreement
and
with that.
With that money, a 27-story house gets built, which nobody needs. We don't need our family to stay in a 27-story house.
Well, I think the one thing that all of us have agreed on is that there is a need to widen the tax net. I think that there's no disagreement with that, and that there is a need to improve tax administration. Mr. Myra, I'll ask the last question to you. Do you think it is likely that we will actually see this tax go up in the next budget? Tough question to ask.
You know, it depends again how this political discourse of the country is going to move. Are we going to support a decision which is going to generate more resources? Two decisions we've talked about. The increases in or reduction in the subsidies on fuels and the increases in the tax on the very rich. That's what's been proposed right now. Not on you, hopefully, Nidhi. I don't know whether you're very rich.
My fingers
but we're
are
talking
crossed.
about very rich people. Are we going to allow the generation of resources in the short term for the sake of growth of the future? And I might just say this. Look, we are all human beings. And for Gurcharan to say that the rich are not driven by envy, for God's sake, I think they're driven even more by envy. Who has the bigger yacht?
Absolutely.
Who goes to the better holiday even further away? It is all that. That's
the
what
rich
it
are,
is.
not the poor.
We're talking
That's what
about,
I'm
look,
trying
do
to
we
say.
care for community? Do we care for each other and the quality of our society? Or are we just driving ourselves to get more for ourselves, envious of what others have more than ourselves? So this is a discourse that needs to happen. What sort of society, what sort of politics, what sort of economy are we going to build?
Well, I think it's a fascinating debate, and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much.
Short point.
Yes, Piyush.
I have 10
seconds.
I think it's very important. It's very important that the government keeps in mind the fact that we have to be competitive in the world. We have to encourage investment, and if at all concessions given to encourage investment reduce the tax rates, I think it's not bad for the economy. As Mr. Gurcharan Das said, we need to encourage growth. We need to attract investment into India. I hope the government doesn't take some short-term steps which may look like they'll raise 2,000-4,000 crores more. But in the long run, the country will have to pay a very heavy price. I think the better way to do it, as I said earlier, was taxing consumption or conspicuous expenditure, but focus on encouraging the world to come and invest in India.
All right, I have to leave it at that tonight, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming in this evening. And